books before moving to letting you talk instead of me. Is a couple books I've just started. This is a totally expensive book, so steal it or don't steal it, because I know the guy. He's a really dedicated Israeli anarchist. Don't steal his book. But check it out and make a bunch of copies. Anarchy Alive by Yuri Gordon, Anti-Authoritarian Politics and Practice Theory. It just came out, and I just am about halfway through, and I'm really enjoying it. It's got pretty, I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a nice little overview on sort of contemporary anarchism and understanding of, what's going on today with anarchism.
Excuse me. Do anarchist authors put PDFs of their works online if they want people to be able to have copies of them?
Google his work. You can probably get every single essay in here online. I read most of this book before he even published it. He just, because all the pieces were available, so probably they are. I don't know why he went on Pluto Press, because he was living in London. He's an Israeli. He lives back in Israel now, but so Pluto's ridiculous. Every one of their books like $35, $40, but I don't know why he chose to publish that.
What's his name?
Yuri Gordon. And a more dated book is by Daniel Guerin, G-U-E-R-I-N. It's just called Anarchism, and it's got an intro by Chomsky. And it's a nice little book because it overviews sort of the principles, some of the history, some of the different tendencies. It leaves out anarcho-communism. Lovely introduction by Chomsky. And another book that's out of print that I totally love, and if you give it to any, probably, it used to be 15-year-olds, but now we'll say 9-year-olds, is Anarchy, a Graphic Guide by Clifford Harper, who is this beautiful woodcuts, and each page is just like a couple little paragraphs about anarchism. It's so accessible and wonderful, no matter what age you are, but I met about 20 people who said I read that book when I was 15, and that's why I became an anarchist. So I think it's out of print, but that's a book that's worth making lots of copies of and giving out as a sort of, those are just 3 books, just randomly, that sort of, there aren't many good intro to anarchism.
What was that last one?
Clifford Harper. And it's called Anarchy, a Graphic Guide. Someone should reprint that. It's really good. It's a good book. Okay. So in the last half hour, I just wanted to open it up to so if anyone else wants to throw out other things they thought bind anarchists together, but I think it'd be interesting to turn to, so if we have these great principles about transforming the entirety of our lives, and making it completely participatory and inclusive and humane and respectful and loving, how do we go about doing this? And how do we practice it? What does it look like for anarchists to start doing that? And for me, I've been wanting to think about what does it look like here in the United States, and if there's, maybe we can include Canada if there's Canadians because they're close, or just south of the border if there's people that are from Mexico too. But I actually think it'd be really interesting. I think for a lot of us, we tend to romanticize as we, in a way, we look to other parts of the world where they're much more highly articulated, much more mature, much more exciting in a lot of ways, movements that have achieved a lot more gains in terms of making them more anarchistic, more anti-authoritarian, more non-hierarchical.
One thing you missed, bring up, is teaching, education. And the way I interpret it is that anarchism is about meeting one's potential. So like an anarchist would say, everybody has to reach their potential. And the reason why we have like oppression or oppressed is that they're not fully formed. And so that what drives us is like getting everyone up to a certain level. Yeah. So training, education.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a strong emphasis on education. Yeah. That's really good. That really binds a lot of you. Yeah. Whether it's education in the form of propaganda or popular education or deschooling, or that's a really central, you're right, educating. But I guess I would like to, what I'd like to do for this last part is to think about, lately I've been thinking about, we're really bad at like talking about the things we do right now that are prefiguring what might be more interesting movements and experiments here. Because I think we don't oftentimes see what we do as kind of as sexy or fully developed as other parts of the world. And that's okay because it isn't here. But there's things we do that do begin to prefigure, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a whole host of new kind of prefigurative experiments that I think it takes sometimes decades to build up towards something larger, but you have to have things like book fairs as places for people to even get to know each other, for instance, and meet and bring their projects to and support. And that's, in the last 10 years, there have been so many more book fairs, for instance, that have started in North America that are happening. And this is the 3rd year for this one, for instance. It's a very young book fair. San Francisco is 16. There's some that have been around for 30, I went to one in Paris, and it feels like the anarchists have been like probably doing that for 150 years. And you kind of feel really humbled when you go to other parts of the world and people have been doing things for a lot longer. But that's okay for us to think about, what do we do here now that begins to prefigure it? And I think the reason for us to look at our own places we live, is to start giving ourselves, to start understanding how those things might fit together and build towards something else. So I thought we could just throw out examples under sort of categories of what would anarchist prefigurative practices look like on the personal, individual, family, friendship, partner levels, the psychological levels, community, either local or geographic, dispersed communities, cyber communities, global communities, social, cultural, prefigurative practices, economic, political, institutional, infrastructure, or within movements, and things that aren't negative but are positive examples of prefiguration that anarchists do. And I'd actually like to have people that do them to talk about different projects that just really briefly just throw out projects that you do that you think prefigure things, values that anarchists embody. Does that seem okay? And someone's taping. If you don't want to be taped, just say you don't want to be taped because some people came in late.
Can I just ask a question about clarifying what you mean by prefigurative?
Yeah.
Like prefigurative of like a future? Or
Yeah, like I really do. I mean, I'm an anarcho-communist, so okay, I'm interested, and I'm really, my passion is I'm really interested in focusing on the political realm. Okay, that's for me. It doesn't mean that all other things are important, but I'm totally obsessed with the form of how we make decisions. Okay, so I would love to, and I live in Vermont. There's town meeting, face-to-face. People once a year can decide anything they want to in town meetings, and I love that. You know, and I wish that used to happen every week in Vermont, and I want that to happen. I want us to make decisions again like that instead of states, and I love having, but that's not happening right now. So how do I prefigure that? I'm part of a couple anarchist collectives, and we try to emulate what it's like to make decisions in a face-to-face way with each other, where we grapple with issues of, you know, how we talk, how we listen to each other, how we make difficult decisions when we don't agree. Do we always decide everything 100% or not? So my bookstore, we just decided last week, for instance, that we want to start, so a group that's doing something in the town we live wanted us to endorse a project they're doing on May 1st, and it's the first time we've ever been asked to do that. And so we had a discussion about endorsements, and we thought, if we ever do this, here's what we want. We want to offer something substantive to it. But we actually decided that we want to decide that by 100% of us have to agree on it. Because we think if someone's really upset about endorsing something, we shouldn't do it. But a lot of other stuff at my bookstore, if 2 people want to do it and nobody else cares, or even if one person kind of is not so excited about it, we generally do it. So we have different ways of deciding things, for instance. That's us practicing what it might look like to make decisions on a larger level. That's what I mean by prefigurative. It's like, I can't suddenly click my fingers and make the state go away, and suddenly everyone's deciding things in face-to-face assemblies. And if we did that overnight, it would probably be horrible, because people don't know how to do that. It's really hard, and for everyone been involved in the collective, have you ever had, it's not often cute and funny, fun and fuzzy and wonderful all the time. It's really hard sometimes. People break up, people aren't speaking to each other, people get really angry over something, we've forgotten how we make decisions when we actually need to have a decision-making process, and that's where we prefigure what it would look like to do that. With people that we actually have a pretty close shared sense of values. The tricky part then is, what does it mean when suddenly we are part of a community-wide meeting where there's suddenly like people we don't share values with? And then we have to practice that too. And that's what I mean by prefiguration. These times we start setting up spaces that look like what we think we want partially, and we try to keep pushing them as far as we can. So I've done a lot of politics where I live, where I try to set up assemblies like that outside of anarchist spaces. And they've been beautiful most of the time. I totally love them. And they usually get squashed by the cities and municipalities. I've done that in neighborhoods, I've done that in cities in Vermont. And even on that local level, they're so threatening. They almost always get destroyed by powers outside, because it's threatening when people get together and start talking to each other, deciding what they want their neighborhood to look like, or even their street. But that's prefiguration, because you're suddenly like, okay, we're going to push forms of decision making against the city council, against the state legislature, against the federal government. Prefiguring, even if we don't have the power yet. And the one thing I left out about prefiguration is the point of it is, in my view, is to keep doing it enough and enough and enough that suddenly you actually have the power.